I am R. R. Nair. I had a long innings with Hindustan Unilever and a former CHRO with Unilever Group of companies. At present, I wear multiple hats. I function as a coach for CEOs and CXOs, a consultant on strategic HR and organization development, and also as an independent director in company boards. By the way, I'm known by my initials, RR. The topic for this podcast is leadership in a changing world. How to think global and act Indian. We all know that to be a successful leader, you must be able to operate amid many challenges and uncertainties. Experience backed by research reveal that the leap from being a successful leader in a domestic market to becoming part of a global business is a big one. Even in the domestic market, post-COVID, there will be a big leap in our thinking paradigm. Besides, global leaders work across multiple cultural settings. And managing multiple relations in diverse cultures would involve credible network of highly engaged employees, customers, suppliers, regulators, and communities. And we couldn't have got two better persons than the two very special guests that I know. Let me introduce first Hema Hattangadi. Hema has obtained her MBA from IIM Calcutta. He is an entrepreneur, impact investor, independent director, and philanthropist. With designer husband, she transformed Conserve, a family business in energy metering, into India's largest energy managing company. In fact, into a technology company. They both exit to Schneider Electric in 2009. And do you know that having discovered Conserve's business success and its unique people-focused culture, Harvard Business School wrote a case study on Conserve. Let me take the pleasure of introducing my second friend, Steve Correa. Steve is an alumnus from XLRA Jamshedpur. He is an executive coach with over 3 decades of corporate experience. He has been the Chief Human Resource Officer of many reputed companies, ranging from major global corporates, MNCs, to family-led professional businesses. In fact, I have known Steve for many years. He is highly regarded among the HR fraternity for his innovative approaches to complex HR challenges, as well as for his flair for teaching and research. He has diverse industry exposure that includes pharmaceuticals, office automation, FMCG, telecommunication, and IT/ITS, and has worked both in India and abroad. Half of his overall experience has been as CHRO. I'm delighted to invite Hema, who is the author of Lift Off, Transforming Conserve, published by Westland Books, and it is a compelling story of both personal and organizational transformation you cannot miss. And Steve, author of a deeply researched and experience-based publication, The Indian Boss at Work, Thinking Global, Acting Indian, and it was published by Sage recently. So are you ready?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Wonderful. This is a common question for both of you. Are leadership traits and values universal or cultural?
Thank you, RR. Well, actually, as I researched this topic, I came across the Globe study by Robert House and a few others. It was a fantastic 10-year study which was done across 62 societies, and it found that many leadership traits were endorsed universally as enabling good leadership practice. So, a few examples I came across were demonstrating trustworthiness, having a sense of justice and honesty, having foresight and planning, motivating, building confidence, being communicative, etc. Equally, the traits that the study found to inhibit good leadership practice universally were things like being asocial, irritable, egocentric, and ruthless. And then, of course, the traits like being individualistic or status conscious, and even the propensity to take risks were seen as culture specific leadership traits. So, if I were to speak from my own experience at the business I ran, Conserve, I actually observed traits that were unique to regions of India, which might have their own subcultures. For example, I noticed the need for overt acknowledgement of self and others, or to be adventurous and risk taking, which sometimes led to over ambitious forecasts, etc., were quite region specific. Similarly, in another region, you could find traits like a low key style in responding to people, to situations, a conservative approach to promoting talent, to making projections, and so on. And I think in India, particularly, we find that there are certain regions where you will see a very high degree of respect for seniority, for authority or age, which creeps into behavior at the workplace. So, what did we do with these disparities that we saw? We actually took advantage of these differences in traits and values by creating a very diverse senior and middle management leadership team. So, for example, our finance head was from a region known for its commercial and business acumen, coupled with a very, very strong sense of ethics and fairness. Our sales head came from a region which was known for a very natural flair for promotion and marketing and ability to build deep and strong relationships. So that obviously helped when it came to distributor and customer relationships. And obviously, they had to meet all our other requirements in terms of qualification and temperament and references, etc. But that is how we made use of culture specific traits. RR?
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that amplification. Steve, what do you think? Can you build on what Hema said? What makes a leader effective?
Yeah, so Ara, in terms of whether it's universal or whether it's cultural, depends really on whom you ask the question and the orientation. So, for instance, in my research, I found that there is an ethic approach, an outside-in lens that looks at, a reductionist positive approach and tries to arrive at a universal theory that's obviously wishing to be objective, impersonal, quantifiable, and controllable. But in doing that, it cleanses the culture from the behavior with the hope that it will demonstrate a pan-cultural generalizability across regions. One of the problems with that is that it seeks to provide a narrative of a grand theological story of development that lies in converging to a single pattern, more often characterized by an industrialized culture of the West. Thankfully, as Hema, you point out, there has been work by Tromp Penners, Orsted, Globe, and the EMIC, or the Indigenous Inside-Out view, also offers a psychosocial view that complements the otherwise ethic view, and places leadership, therefore, in its context and its actual construction. Now, having said that, I believe that the imperatives that human beings face are universal. However, our response to those imperatives are absolutely cultural. I assert that there is a distinctiveness, and I don't mean uniqueness, about the Indian leader, how he thinks, feels, and behaves in the workplace. I believe that he acts, as you pointed out, Hema, in response to his call, which is the existential time and the social character prevalent in the country, and Desh, his inheritance, such as identity, race, caste, religion, of place, as you explained about some of your functional heads. But more importantly, in India, contextually to the Indian environment, which is ever unfolding. So, being contextually relevant in Indian situations, inside or outside, RR is what makes him actually effective. Over to you.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Steve. And your reference to hostage culture framework is very interesting because a lot of organization development practitioners, they tend to focus around hostage model. Now, Hema, you have listened to what Steve has to say. Any final comments?
Yeah, maybe I could add, yeah, sure. RR, maybe I could talk a little bit about, given this context, what makes a leader effective. So let me give you a few thoughts I have on that. So I feel a leader is effective when she connects with not just minds, but the hearts of people. I know Maya Angelou is quoted a lot these days, but I have to use her here. She said, people forget what you said, people forget what you did, but people never forget how you made them feel. So how do you connect with hearts? Well, for one, you could take the trouble to understand their context. And this is something that Steve just spoke about. What is context? It means who they really are, what makes them tick, what makes them laugh or cry. How important is their spouse or partner or parent or pet to them? So at Conserve, our culture tried to encourage families to be a part of our lives. Our social networks included communicating to the families and not just to the employee who comes to the workplace. We invited kids to meetings. We asked parents and in-laws for help in locating scarce skills. And we were super compassionate in times of adversity. We went out of the way, RR, as you know, to accommodate talented and committed people who couldn't come to work because they'd had an accident which had left them incapacitated. In fact, somebody who saw a movie about us recently wrote to me on LinkedIn and said, do you remember that you actually allowed me to work from home in a special assignment for 9 months? I didn't recollect at the time that I had done that, but that's the kind of thing we did. Sometimes we had to assimilate women whose husbands had moved out of Bangalore to tiny rural areas, and the wife had to follow. So we didn't want to lose her. We created something special for her. Secondly, I think effective leaders make it easy for people to be comfortable in their own skin. And to me, this is a very, very important trait. I'm going to come back to it in a little bit. But if a leader is authentic and can summon up the courage to face up to his or her worst failing in front of others, you'll be surprised how much forgiveness you find. Sometimes even an out of proportion response when you have a crisis. So I remember this story at Conserve when we had a very bad cash crunch. I think it was the first time we were in that kind of spot. The head of a region, which generally had a reputation for being kind of focused on, commercial, even selfish gain, called me to insist that I should cut his pay by 30% because he wanted to do his bit to help the company. As you can imagine, I was completely moved. Thirdly, effective leaders have an engaging style, not just shallow charm or flattery. They use humor. They're optimistic. So I remember almost all our meetings at Conserve, especially we had these dreaded mind-numbing monthly reviews where we talked too much about figures, have you done what you said you would do? We had the sound of laughter and we had the sound of people having fun inside the meeting room. So we actually managed to get through very tough agenda items because we managed to see the funny side of things or situations. RR?
Thank you, Hema. Very interesting. In some ways, I think you sort of made a point that leadership is about weaving the minds and the hearts of people. That's fascinating. Let's turn to question number 2. And this is a question specifically addressed to Steve. What are the traits you call out in your book of the Indian leader, the Indian boss at work?
Thank you. I first must just take a step back and talk about the leadership literature that has started mostly from the Second World War and coming from North America and Europe, mostly written by males, and with involvement of weird participants, which is a mnemonic for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, and obviously coming from academia. Uh, in looking at that model, it didn't seem to relate to me intuitively with the facets of the Indian leader. For one, I believe that the human being is not a noun. He is a verb. She is a continuous process of the being, the Atmic self, and the becoming, the socialized self. And as R.R. Ramanujan has pointed out, highly context sensitive in deploying how he or she thinks, feels, and acts. I've also found it very difficult to pin traits that she is this or she is that. I think an analogy may help. If I look at the story of the Ganges that emanates from Gangotri, if the slopes are steep, the water, if that's the spirit of the human being, flows through fast and rapid, and then stretches and widens at the banks where it's broader. It turns into a rapid when it confronts rocks and plunges forth whenever there is a steep decline like a waterfall. So my view is that we constantly adjust our behavior to the context, and we are this, and we are that, and we are more. Now, in order to bring that out in my book, in a sense, like a facet, not a trait, a facet that perhaps could be a diamond leadership model, I talk about the fact that the Indian leader is a kind of a Behrupiya. He is polyphrenic of many forms. He may have a fixed score in the private sphere, but he's obviously very flexible in the workplace. And just like the Sanskrit word Anikanta Veda, which means having multiple sides, I think the Indian leader is a kaleidoscope of characteristics, a quiver full of potency. It's like a garam masala or an Indian thali, if you pardon all my mixed metaphors. So really, not only that, we have the tradition of the modern kaleidoscope of a postmodern world, and we have the traditional metaphor of the dance of the Shiva, which is the Tandavam. And it is in this crossroad that we must see the leader in terms of what his or her traits are, alive to the polarities, dilemmas, paradoxes, contradictions, when he or she has to work with this Eastern and Western orientation that is both present. And so I've used an acronym called the DESI, Desi Leader, and for each of them I've expanded it. So D stands for, directive and nurturant, like the Karta that we are known to. And I go on to explain each of these characteristics in the book, saying that he is this in this situation, and he is that in that situation. Having said that, however, when I look at it from a broader generalization, there are some unique characteristics that come forth. The fact that India is a society of high power distance, and there's an acceptance of power hierarchies across regions based on gender, literacy, social, ethnic group, a mix of collectivist culture and individualistic culture. It's interestingly moderately masculine. It's got a low uncertainty avoidance culture, denoting tolerance to managing uncertainty, and of course a long-term orientation and both pragmatic and a restrained culture. So in researching India through a emic lens, I've also discovered that there is an ethnic orientation that is very distinctive and which belongs to being part of community, race, minority, and social groups. The most of my book actually goes on to elaborate each of these facets in great detail, RR. So I'll stop with at this point with this explanation.
Wonderful, Steve, for that very elaborate and very reflective responses. And I think I'm sure that the listeners will be interested to take a look at your work, the first piece of writing that you have done. And I think from what you said, the global person and the Indian person both resides in us. And therefore, we seem to be managing this duality in the context of the multiple dimensions of the cultures that you have talked about and referred in your book. Now, let me move to question number 3, and this is addressed to both of you. How can the Indian leader become glocal? GLOCAL. Can you give some examples, cross-cultural and also cultures within? And can Hema start with?
Yeah, sure, RR. But before I jump into the answer to this one, I just wanted to thank Steve for that extremely scholarly answer. I was just wishing that I had met you all those years ago when I was running the business. I probably would have understood why I was doing what I was doing much better. So, RR, let me come to the question you asked me. Very interesting, very contemporary, and very relevant for our times, I think. So we were lucky that at Conserve, we were being nudged to be glocal from the start. We didn't realize it, of course, at the time. I probably didn't know what the word meant because I'm talking about the late 1997, 98. So we had giants like T. Thomas, our chairman, and we had coaches like the very great R.R. Nair, who were playing a big role in helping us to get glocal. So we were glocal in our approach to design, to branding, to people. So let me just take you through a few of the things we did. So that will help to illustrate what I'm talking about. First thing is we were taught to challenge ourselves constantly. No room for complacency. So what did we do? We were asked to benchmark with the best in class, not only in India, but in the world. We used to actually run quarterly benchmarking visits with amazing regularity. And we led visits to all sectors of the industry. We never said, oh, this is automotive, we make energy meters. I don't think this makes any sense for us. So we went to all sectors of industry, all sizes of companies. And I think that's what helped us, all of us as a team, to realize that if we had to succeed, there was no room for mediocrity. We've got to get better than we think is our best. Secondly, in just my second year as CEO, T. Thomas, or TT as we used to call him, convinced us that we've got to start exporting. I was, of course, quite horrified because I felt that we weren't even doing enough in the Indian market. But he said, no, you start exporting to the most demanding countries. Start with Southeast Asia, go to Singapore. Why? Because then you will realize that your products are not exactly world beating, and you will have to continue to invest in design and marketing and development and everything else until you start stacking up against the best in the world. And we did that. And after a few mistakes and missteps, we did end up becoming a single source supplier to a huge global multinational in the North American market. So I think that proved the point that TT was trying to make. Thirdly, change. I think for global leaders, learning to anticipate, to welcome, to embrace change is a key skill if they've got to deal with the world as it evolves, a VUCA world as they call it. So we started pretty early on something called a change agent program, and we started creating internal change facilitators. And 4, we had ruthless internal auditors who were trained to hold up a mirror to the rest of us every quarter on how had we slipped or how had we improved against international standards for systems and processes. And believe me, these auditors were very, very grueling. I mean, the whole affair used to be like passing in a very intense stress interview. And finally, as the CEO, I was sent to global leadership programs, and I'm very thankful and feel very grateful to the company that they did that for me. Why did we do that? Because I had to learn to benchmark myself against the best minds. You know, sitting here in India, you tend to think I'm growing at a CAGR of 26%, 30%, so I must be really, really good. But you get an opportunity to see how small you really are, and you get to learn from the biggies in the field. So there were a lot of other initiatives, RR, which actually helped us to go from SME to MNC, as I like to call it. And it also helped us to get almost seamless integration into the global giant that we exit to, which was Schneider Electric. So if you want to hear more about this or know more about it, read my book. Over to you, RR.
Thank you. And I think it is a must read. Transforming Conserve is a beautiful story, and it is a true story. And I think touching upon why Schneider Electric, a global leader, chose to acquire Conserve. It's very well amplified in what Jean Pascal, who is actually the global chairman of Schneider Electric, had to say. And I'm quoting, "My decision was also based on the personality and drive of Hema Tangadi, who personified Conserve culture," and we are talking about the global nature of the Conserve culture, "and I trusted her completely as she guided us through the complex post-acquisition process as well." Now, wonderful to hear your story. And let me turn to Steve. Steve, what are your reflections on how can the Indian leader become global?
So I want to correct the impression about trying or wanting to become, because you must remember that India is the world's oldest living civilization, 7,000 years. And outside of the year 1700 down to independence, we have been, along with China, having 50% of the world's GDP in that sense. So we are a resurgent economy, known to be a golden chariot in the past, and we've always been local in our nature and in our orientation. We have exported culture and so on and so forth. But to your question, as I interrogated a little deeper, I think today the Indian leader is living in a duality of a cultural orientation shaped, like I said, by Kal, Desh, and Patra, but also a product of a Western education, and if I may say, an aping of the West because of the affluence it has achieved. So it has imbibed self-directed, goal-oriented orientation. And of course, modern day management practice and so on and so forth. And as a result, she has two hats, one professional and the other spiritual. And to get around hurdles of both tradition and modernity, whether it's social or at the workplace, there is continuous innovation. And Indians, as you know, Hema, take pride in jugaad, social hacks to get things around.
Absolutely.
But inherent in every leader is not about cross-cultural or managing other cultures. The real challenge is to be able to co-hold the tensions of holding an Indian background and working in a Western foreground. It's like, doing a Shakespearean play in NCPA theatre in Mumbai. Everything's Indian, but you're doing an English play. And I think the Indian leader is gripped with the need to respond to the situation with an Indian spirit. So it seems as if it's opposite. And unless one is able to manage this experience of ambivalence and tension, this dharam sankata in a manner of speaking, this integration, that's where she can or he can become truly global. To be able to manage this with elan, Vishwakarma Puja in the factory, at the same time running a global video call with multicultural attendees, is something that is what she does quite easily and appropriately. Now, some Indian leaders, they have earned a huge reputation and respect for themselves. But the fact is that a large majority of Indian leaders are not able to create that integration between the two halves that lie within. And for them, therefore, recognizing that which is Indian and that which is global is absolutely important. Because without that, they will remain a Trishanku. The case of that handsome king who wanted to ascend heaven and got stuck midway. So I think that to be global is really not about just managing cross cultures, but it's to be able to bring that individuation of the self, both owning up the Indian and at the same time owning up the Western. Thank you, Arun.
Thank you, Steve, for those very deep and very insightful observations. And I like this expression, co-holding Indian background and Western foreground. I think that's wonderful. And I think you have emphasized this whole importance of ambidexterity. And I think in this process, we might be sort of experiencing a degree of creative tension. But in that lies the best of global. Let me actually move on to question number 4. And more as a couple of reflections before I call out the question number 4, let me say this. In fact, it's my firm belief that there should come a day we should be talking about leaders only, not women leaders. And look at the strange thing that we still celebrate International Women's Day. And some of the stereotypes about women leaders are embedded in our psyche. And this will change, and this will have to change. My question number 4 is related to this theme. And this question is to both Hema and Steve. What challenges do women face in the workplace? Hema, can you go first?
Yes, thanks, Sarar. Actually, I want to start with a quote which I've abbreviated, and I'm hoping you will take a shot at guessing who said it. She was intensely sympathetic, immensely charming, utterly unselfish. She excelled in the difficult arts of family life. She sacrificed herself daily. If there was a draft, she sat in it. In short, she was so constituted that she never had a mind or a wish of her own, but preferred to sympathize always with the minds and wishes of others. She was the angel in the house. Any prizes, any guesses? RR, Steve?
No, Hema.
Okay. So this quote is from 1931 and it was by Virginia Woolf. So when I read this, I was thinking, thank God we don't.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thanks. So thank God we don't live in Victorian times anymore, RR, but it feels like not all that much has changed. In fact, some of the facets that I'm going to just show you with the help of some statistics, I think are worse. So here are some data points. So in 2017, men made up 79% of the workforce in India versus women making up 27%. What was the world average in 2017? Women were 50.29%, or roughly half. No, I mean exactly half. And the second data point is the ILO, the International Labour Organization, ranks India's FLFP, which is the female labour force participation rate, at 121 out of 131 countries. Abysmal, don't you think? It's one of the lowest in the world. And in South Asia, guess what? We are the lowest with the exception of Pakistan. So if you want more women leaders, we firstly need to have most women students in elite institutions. Girls seem to be getting into medical and engineering colleges. They make up between 35 to 45% depending on which year you're looking at. But the moment you look at the data for, say, the elite IITs in our country, it goes down to single digits, 8 to 9%. And why are we worried about the low admission rate into elite IITs? Because these are the ones which finally open the doors to very high paid and high profile jobs for women, helps them to get into the orbit of senior leadership positions. And when these very few highly educated women finally make it to corporates, what do they face? They face office politics. They find the need to hang out. And, I wish I was on a visual, but I'm doing air quotes here, the need to hang out and stay late. An expectation that she's going to be available 24/7, on call. And all this while she looks after home, kids, parents, and or in-laws. No wonder that apparently college-educated women in the workforce hit glass ceilings and dropped out of the workforce like ninepins in a period that was studied by a World Bank report. And then, of course, you have the famous and unfortunately eternal job versus career dilemma, that women are mostly encouraged to have a job based on the convenience of the partner, while men are encouraged to have careers. So they have a long-term approach and can, take up responsibilities that women can't. Okay, so we know it's generally tough for women to get in and stay in. But let me, not become very morose about it. Let me share a few things we did at Conserve in the hope that the people listening in will find some solutions for the kind of challenges that they face at the workplace, whether as entrepreneurs or as women leaders leading businesses. So one, at Conserve, nearly all salespeople were males and engineers when we started out. And then I started at the social do's we used to have, almost every quarter we would invite wives and children and we'd get to know them. I started unearthing that there were highly qualified, talented wives sitting at home, looking after babies or looking after the elders at home. So I did very special things to get some of them into the workforce. In the case of one such couple where we had the husband and wife working together, they turned up in the same team because their qualifications were in the same area. It was the very, very tough area of energy audit consulting. And I noticed that the husband would dominate the wife. Okay, wife has been brought into work, she's in the workforce, but they're sitting at a team meeting and the husband will dominate. When she makes a suggestion, he says, oh, I don't think that's, really such a great idea. So I happened to be in on one of these meetings, saw what was happening. I had a discussion with the wife and I realized that she was very, very good in quality assurance of audit reports. So I put her in charge of QA and I said, what you're going to do is going to impact the customer directly. So I want you to report to me. So that conveyed all the right messages, and not just to the husband, but generally to everybody in the company. Of course, on the manufacturing shop floor, thanks to all the stuff that Ashok's father had done when he set up this company, we already had a lot of women. And we made sure that every time there was a new intake, we gave an equal opportunity for women to be interviewed. And, today it's the fashion to say all this, but we were doing this in 1998, 99, and so on. Secondly, we also ensured that compensation was only linked to performance. There was no gender disparity. Unfortunately, even today, the dialogue, not just in India, it happens in very famous broadcasting companies in the UK. It happens very much in America. There is pay disparity in relation to gender, and that's a very, very dangerous trend for women to participate in the workforce. Thirdly, and I think this particular initiative, which I called Conservina, is something that really stood the women in the company in good stead. It was a support group for women. And, it was across blue collar, white collar, pink collar. I mean, there are all these colors of collars apparently. But we said, you're a woman, you run the dual burden of home and job and you're finding it difficult. Come on in. We're going to make sure that you get a mental, emotional, sometimes even financial support. And certainly we made them sort of exposed to a whole bunch of training sessions that made them aware of what was going on in the world, which they were not otherwise exposed to. Something? This group exists in an informal way even today, 10 years after we exit from the business. Again, RR, I'm going to be very shameless about plugging my book, but there's a whole half a chapter on how we did this. And I would urge the listeners to look at it for ways of expanding a support network for women. Fourthly, I insisted that people should work efficiently during working hours. I found, some men would hang out for cigarette and chai breaks. They'd be around the gate at the shop near the gate during the day. And then as it got to beyond lunchtime, they'll start working. And close to closing time, they would actually dig in and really start getting effective. And then they'll go home late and make the harried wife feel like he worked very hard in the office. So at our social meets, I would make sure that the women knew, or the wives knew, I did not want people staying back late. And I also told them I'm willing to do anything to help people get more productive so that husbands go back to families. So I even created maintenance or holiday breaks. So people took the leave that they had to their credit, but were not taking it. Don't ask me why. A lot of senior male managers refused to go on long vacations. But I said, no, I'm going to shut the company down. It's going to be closed in summer and winter for 5 working days, plus a weekend before and after. So they got 9 days twice a year. We got mind-blowing results. Was I popular when I started the first thing? Not with all the men. But when they started enjoying themselves, they realized that it was an amazing thing to do. Men began to realize the struggles of wives or kids at home with physical or mental challenges, and the wives began to thank us for helping the dads realize what they'd been missing. And finally, something that's become even more critical in today's context is that we made it very safe in the workplace for women and safe to travel to and from work. All that time ago, way before posh became an act and all that. Well, given that I got into the CEO role thanks to Ashok and Ashok, my husband, and my chairman's support, I was acutely aware of the responsibility that I had to all the women out there. And I know for a fact that these women from Conserve have gone on to much greater things in Schneider or elsewhere and are doing their bit to make life in the workplace a little easier for other women. RR?
Yeah, thank you so much, Hema, for sharing some of the practical challenges that you found women employees encountered in Conserve, and how, as the CEO and Vice Chairman, you helped and addressed and enabled them to come out of those challenges. And I think also for your global perspective, because where we stand, it's a long journey, and I'm sure that we haven't yet seen the sight of destination. Over to you, Steve. Looking forward to your comments on this very interesting question about challenges women face at workplace.
Sara, I first of all want to celebrate your opening comment on in the future there will only be leaders, and without reference to gender. To listeners listening in, I just want to share that counterintuitively, the discussion around gender differences in D&I only widens the chasm, the schism, the differences, rather than resolves it. The whole narrative of feminine and masculine is a socially constructed phenomena and is fundamentally flawed because it seeks to promote gender equality through the lens of patriarchal thinking, and as Emma, you confirmed through Virginia's comments about the kind of stultified, sanitized image of that of a woman who is held in her relationships as spouse, daughter-in-law, etc., mother. And many of the actions that we see in organizations are mere tokenism, symbolism, and I dare say very real leadership action. We must transcend and go beyond that. The Indian wisdom has continued to point out that all humans are both have Nar and Nari, the Purush and the Prakriti. And it is that requires integration. Whether you're a male or a female leader, embracing the feminine, the intuition and the creativity is what needs to be owned up by men. And for women, like the female goddesses that we have, that also have a sword, to embrace the warrior identity that is inherent. For Indian wisdom clearly brings out that we are both male and female principles. And of course, Western philosophers like Jung and Gareth Hill have referenced anima, animus, yin, yang, and also the micro-development around the movement between masculine and feminine. Now, that's an important element for us to be able to recognize that the current workplace is highly masculine and needs models which are now emergent through globe studies and other things, Emma, that you pointed out. If I take a walk into the organizational arena, it's really sad that the psychosocial phenomena which is there in India also seeps into the workplace and how. While the world has a universal problem around women leaders, it is more acute in India. For a start, some women actually do not take up electives in college and deny themselves those opportunities at the workplace. There are myths about women that need to be busted, and I've talked about that in a full chapter on women leaders. And the entire issue of empowering women in society, both in terms of opportunity and access, is not there at all. So one of the things I found that strings together many of the things, Hema, that you talked about, is women from the start are restricted to certain roles, which we call the glass walls. They have many roadblocks in terms of their career advancement, in terms of the glass elevator. Some are given roles that are less risk, and some are placed in positions of failure, which I call the glass cliff. And some have to go through elaborate labyrinths that act as impediments in a career, both in the organization and also at home and in society. And what is it that we actually have to confront? We have to confront the male prejudice of the broken rungs, the leaky pipeline, the glass ceilings. And we have to be able to bring to the front the monolithic Adam and Eve, Ram and Sita, the whole patriarchy that must be understood rather than male and female. It is through this understanding only that we can empower women and therefore empower society. Over to you, Radha.
Yeah, Steve, you have very forcefully articulated, and I really cannot disagree with everything that you said. And this patriarchal thinking must change. And I think while we all pursue certain targets and goals in terms of gender diversity, at the end of it, it is about fundamentally altering the psyche of the organization. And to some extent, my belief is that post-pandemic, I think there would be a more serious and introspective analysis. What would be the new enablers as we move to the new normal, which will encourage more women to come into the place of work? Now, we moved very quickly to question number 5, and this question is exclusively for you, Hema.
Yep.
And it's all about the price that you have had to pay for your success, both intended and unintended. And I would very much appreciate if you would actually anchor your responses around your own personal experience as a woman of substance at the workplace, and also as an independent director, besides, of course, multiple systems that you had to encounter and deal with. Over to you, Hema.
Yeah, thank you, RR. I think that's a question that every CEO, every woman leader confronts in her lifetime. And looking back, I realized that I think the biggest price I paid was seemingly never having enough time for my son, because he was just a year old when I became CEO. And I always felt that when he was growing up, I wasn't around. I didn't have the time and the energy to invest in building relationships with extended family. I missed a lot of PTAs at his school. I missed family weddings and celebrations, events in the larger community. So there was always this requirement of dealing with a nagging feeling, or of guilt and conflict. What effect will my absence have on my son's emotional health? Will he grow up to be a wacko child? And will he one day say that it is because you did this to me that, so all of those very scary thoughts. And then an amazing thing happened. 3 years ago, when Raghav was 22, Raghav is my son, my co-author, Ashish Sen, interviewed him because he wanted his insights for the book. And I think, frankly, RR, he wanted a report card on me as a parent. And Ashish gave me this transcript, and I said, "Oh my God, should I read it?" He said, "Go ahead." And you know what Raghav had to say about our parenting? He said, "I don't know why she kept feeling that I'm going to grow up to be an insecure child. In fact, I think she overcompensated for her absence." He says, "Mom always brought me gifts I didn't expect every time that she traveled. In fact," he says, "I learned a lot from the conversations that Anu and Amma, which is Ashok and me, had at the dinner table when we shared our experiences, brought home extremely interesting people who were visiting the company. We made sure that they always came home and met our children. And it was quite a relief to read that." But I must say that while I was going through that period, I was constantly on the lookout for where are the role models, these women achievers who seem to have done it all. And I came across a book, again, it was something that was gifted to me by T. Thomas, because he realized my constant conflict. And this was a book called Mother's Work. And it was written by this fantastic businesswoman called Rebecca Mathias. I'd urge listeners to make a special note of this and get it as soon as they can. Rebecca Mathias and her book Mother's Work. And she had written little executive summaries at the end of each chapter to help women like me and others resolve or at least acknowledge the conflicts that we felt. And I found that I could live by her 3-point mantra, which helped me on the darkest days as I dealt with all the conflicts I was talking about. And what were these 3 points? 1, think big. 2, focus. 3, never give up. Everything else will fall into place.
Very deep experiences that you underwent and the challenges that you experienced. And at the end of it, I think all these experiences have significantly transformed you as a leader, and also, without your probably formally recognizing, transformed the way you change the organization. So transformation at 2 levels, both at your personal level and also at the institutional level.
Indeed.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, RR. Well said.
We now go to this last question. And this question is to both of you. What advice would you both like to give the new generation millennials? My sense is that a lot of millennials would be listening to this podcast, and I think this is something which would be of great interest. So can we start with Steve to begin with?
Sure. Thanks, Anand. So I think, like the title of my book, I think the first advice would be to think global and act Indian, and to blend the Harvard and the Rishi and be a Rajeshri, bringing in balance and harmony, which is in line with our ancient tradition. I think the second is to define your own leadership, be the brand that you wish to be, and be clear in terms of all the values that you've had, and bring that in terms of living it and demonstrating it. Values that set you apart, in the first half of your career, perhaps it's your competencies that take you there, but it's your values that give you that lift of 10x that takes you to the sky. And therefore, working with one's value is absolutely critical. There is a notion of a term called Aukad, which is know your boundaries, know your place, know your station. And while I do ask for ambition, is also be practical in terms of being able to really constantly be in touch with one's own potentials. There are lessons to be remembered in Abhimanyu in terms of daring, but at the same time not be reckless. And lastly, for me, the one thing that matters most is get to understand your personal purpose. It took me years to realize that my personal purpose is to follow my own light and help others follow theirs. So discover your personal purpose. After that, life just opens up tremendous the skies for you. Arun.
Discovering the personal purpose, the inner calling. Wonderful, Steve. Emma, your thoughts?
Sure. So, advice to the new generation millennials. I think first off, I would say, given the times we live in, think about how you can show real empathy. How can you walk in the shoes of another? And what is real empathy? Real empathy, in my view, is through action and not just a passive, I get it, I know how you feel kind of statements, right? The second piece of advice would be patient. And, I think as we age, we discover that patience is indeed a virtue. Now, longer lifespans mean you will live till you are 80 or 90 or more. So what's the rush to get that pay hike or that promotion or that tag of vice president by the time you're 27? What will you do with the rest of your life? Think about that. The third thing, and this is something I referred to in an earlier answer, was learn to be comfortable in your own skin. Why? Because I think it's easier to adjust in the workplace if people know who they're really dealing with. So don't put on a mask. Show people who you really are. And finally, remember that you can make a difference, however small. Don't worry from day one about not adding value. Am I contributing to the larger purpose? What is the role I am playing in this company, etc.? Or that you're not making a dent in the mission. You will. RR?
Oh, wonderful. These are absolutely fabulous. In fact, we must have a podcast just on this topic of millennials.
Yes.
And how do you prepare the life post-pandemic? And I'm sure that both of you have to come back again to deal with this topic.
It would be a pleasure.
Okay, with this last question, sixth question, we have come to an end as regards the question rounds are concerned. And it is time for us to move to the rapid fire rounds. And these are going to be pretty fast, the tempo. And in this section, we go into the rapid fire round with a request that both of you may please try and answer your responses in a few words. So can we start with the first question to both of you?
Sure.
Yes.
A principle shaped from early childhood experience. Hema.
Resilience and resourcefulness. We were 4 girls. Dad retired when the youngest 2 was still in school and college. So we had to be frugal. And seeing how our parents managed to put us all through fantastic schools that gave us the best start in life made us all resilient. RR?
Beautiful. Education. And that matters. Steve, your response.
For me, grab opportunities. I had extracurricular activities, sports, elocution, drama, that helped me grow. And the other is that this too shall pass. The biblical reference to good times or bad times, it will always pass. So treat life as a transition.
Beautiful. Optimist as always. Question number 2. What have you discovered about yourself? A unique gift or quality to become a leader of consequence. Hema.
Instinct and empathy for people. So as an impatient young CEO, I was always in a hurry. And I thought systems and processes is what we need. And that's what is going to get us through. I learned that they don't. That people matter more. And that not everyone fits the culture. And that the most important part of my job as a leader was to engage and enmesh people. RR?
Thank you. Steve.
I've been hardworking and therefore I've always stayed curious and to learn and discover. I think the authenticity. And I've always wanted to build my own courage to make a difference.
Thank you. Rapid fire question number 3. And this is to Hema. You have always impressed me as a gifted person who finds a way to get things done. That's your unique brand equity. Can you share a unique quality that drives your excellence in execution?
Sure, RR. People usually talk about the ABC of something, but as I grew Conserve, I realized a D, E, F were even more important. D for drive, E for energy, and F for focus. RR?
Beautiful. Steve, you have another question. You have always come across to me as a data-driven, research-focused, and conceptually strong as a professional. And can you describe one unique contribution which would make these qualities come alive?
The belief that, like the 6 blind men and the elephant in the room, that each one is speaking the truth, but a truth that is not the entire truth. And with curiosity, hard work, looking at multiple perspectives, I at least have enjoyed the widening perspective.
Thank you, Steve. And the last rapid fire question. Hema, if you could change one thing about yourself, what would it be?
Become more of a patient listener. I think I've been saying that most of my life, and at some points in my life, I thought I had learned how to do that, but feedback from the family says that I haven't quite got there. So I think that's going to be it's going to be a constant effort. All right.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. Steve, your response.
I think that when I talk about the Indian and the Western orientation, I struggle with integrating those two sides in myself, and it's for me a continuous process.
Wonderful. Talking about listening, I'm reminded of same question that was asked of Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said was that when he was a child, he used to accompany his father to all the tribal meetings. And he found that the father did two things which impacted him hugely. One, sat around a round circle. And number two, he encouraged everyone to speak. And he invariably was the last one to speak. So to be a good listener, learn the skill of speaking last. Okay, thank you. Thank you both for all your responses, Emma and Steve. And with that, I wind down this podcast. Let me say that the last few minutes have been a very enlightening experience for me. And indeed, all of you as listeners to this podcast would have found the experiences truly insightful and rewarding. And here are some final thoughts from my side. First and foremost is what a variety of gifts both Hema and Steve have offered to all of us. Really on this topic of leadership in a changing world and how to think globally, the whole theme has emerged as an extremely multi-dimensional theme. There is psychology, there is sociology, there is anthropology, there is history, there is geography. Oh, what a kaleidoscopic topic that we seem to have chosen. Point number two, I think in the course of what we have listened so far and the thoughts that were shared by Hema and Steve, leadership too is a multidimensional concept. And I think when we talk about some of the high frequency words that both of them used, it includes trust, it includes empathy, authenticity, optimism, and probably a couple of more I can add: humility, respect, and of course, Steve and Hema talked about values, but values and character. The third important point is that at the end of the day, when you really look at functioning effectively in this changing world, it becomes extremely important for us to also consider the high impact experience all of us have actually gone through because of the pandemic. And I think implicit in what they have said, and many times explicit, three words that stands out from my perspective: accept, adjust, and adopt, both in terms of managing disruptions and also in setting the new normal going forward. And the last one is, at the end of the day, a topic of this nature has actually taught us one thing, that I think this whole arena requires deep reflection, deep thinking, deep practice, and therefore if there is one important leadership quality that we must continue to imbibe, is learning agility. Can we become non-stop learners? And thanks to the work done by Hema and Steve and the wonderful publications that I have referred, and they have constantly referred about their work, I would strongly recommend you to take a look at both these books that we have referred in this podcast. And I just want to conclude by saying it has been such an invigorating experience for me personally. Thank you for asking me to coordinate this panel discussion during this podcast. Stay safe, stay positive as always. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, RR. Absolute delight
you,
to have
RR.
been here.